The World War sleeping mat that saved soldiers when everything else failed. The fastest way to die in a war zone wasn't always a bullet. Sometimes it was the ground beneath you. During the World Wars, especially the First and Second, soldiers learned a brutal lesson very quickly. Cold earth steals heat faster than wind, rain, or snow. You could survive without food for days. You could fight without sleep for a while. But lose your body heat night after night, and the war would finish you long before the enemy did. That is where a simple sleeping mat stepped in and quietly saved countless lives. This wasn't comfort gear. It wasn't luxury. It was survival engineering stripped to its core. Why the ground was the real enemy? Most people think cold kills from the air. In reality, the ground is far more dangerous. When a human body lies directly on soil, concrete, or frozen terrain, heat drains away through conduction. Soldiers in Europe, North Africa, and the Eastern Front faced this every night. Trenches were damp, forest floors were frozen, ruins were soaked in rain. Sleep meant exposure. Early in both wars, armies underestimated this problem. Blankets helped, but only above the body. Coats helped, but only while moving. At night, when soldiers stopped generating heat, the cold crept in from below. Hypothermia cases rose fast, even in areas that were not considered extreme climates. Frostbite followed. Trenchfoot returned. Morale collapsed. The solution wasn't complex. It just had to work. The answer came in the form of a simple insulating mat. Different armies used different versions, but the principle was the same everywhere. Create a barrier between the body and the ground. Trap air. Stop heat loss. German forces issued reed mats and later foam-like fibre mats that could be rolled and strapped to gear. Soviet soldiers used thick felted mats and padded ground cloths made from compressed fibres. British and Commonwealth troops relied on ground sheets paired with straw, grass or kapok-filled pads when available. American forces issued sleeping pads made from layered fabric and stuffing, later experimenting with inflatable designs. None of these were elegant. All of them worked. The materials were chosen for one reason. They trapped air without absorbing too much moisture. Air is insulation. The mat didn't need to be thick. It needed to break contact with the ground. Even a few centimetres made a measurable difference in body temperature retention. Here's the interesting part. Soldiers who used these mats consistently slept longer, recovered faster, and stayed combat-ready under conditions that broke others. Designed for war, perfect for survival. These mats were built with brutal practicality in mind. They had to roll tight. They had to survive mud, snow, fire embers, and, well, constant abuse. They had to be usable anywhere. Forest floor, rubble, open field, trenches, rail cars, concrete bunkers. No zippers, no complex valves, no failure points. Many mats doubled as seating, splint padding, or insulation for equipment. In emergencies, they were cut up to pad boots or wrap around canteens to prevent freezing. This adaptability really mattered. Gear that does one job well is useful, but gear that does 5 jobs keeps you alive. Modern survivalists often overlook this. They focus on tools, knives, fire starters, filters. In the World Wars, soldiers learned that rest was the real force multiplier, and rest required insulation. Cold kills quietly. One of the most dangerous things about cold exposure is how subtle it feels at first. Soldiers would lie down tired but functional. They would wake up stiff, slower, and honestly less coordinated. Reaction times dropped. Judgment suffered. In extreme cases, soldiers simply didn't wake up. Medical reports from the Eastern Front during World War II show that units with proper ground insulation had significantly lower rates of cold-related injuries, even when clothing and rations were identical. The mat didn't make headlines, it didn't win medals, but it kept bodies alive long enough to fight another day. That, folks, really matters. It's tempting to think a thick blanket solves the problem. It doesn't. A blanket compresses under body weight. Compressed insulation loses effectiveness. The ground, meanwhile, remains dense and cold. The mat's job was not warmth in the traditional sense, it was separation. This is a principle that still applies today. Campers who ignore ground insulation suffer even in mild weather. Soldiers learned this lesson under artillery fire. Once learned, it stuck. Some armies even trained recruits to build improvised mats using brushwood, pine boughs, straw, or folded uniforms when issued gear was missing. The rule was simple: never sleep directly on the ground, ever. Modern sleeping pads owe their existence to these wartime lessons. Foam pads, inflatable mats, and insulated air mattresses all follow the same logic used a century ago. Trap air, break contact, retain heat. What changed is comfort. What did not change is physics. For survival situations today, this lesson is gold. You can improvise insulation almost anywhere. Cardboard, bark, leaves, clothing, rope nets filled with grass. The material matters less than the function. Create space between you and the ground. Even a bad mat is better than none. World War soldiers didn't debate this. They lived it. Ask veterans what saved them, and you rarely hear about the mat. That's because survival tools that work quietly fade into the background. But diaries and letters tell another story. Soldiers wrote about the relief of unrolling a mat after days of movement, about sleeping through artillery because for once their body wasn't fighting the cold. In extreme conditions, the mat became non-negotiable. Lose your rifle, and you could borrow one. Lose your mat in winter, and your odds dropped fast. This was not gear designed to impress. It was designed to endure. The sleeping mat is a reminder of something history keeps teaching us. Survival is often about basics done well, not innovation for its own sake, not complexity, just understanding the environment and respecting it. Cold ground is relentless. It does not care how strong you are or how motivated you feel. The world wars proved that a thin layer of insulation could be the difference between endurance and collapse. That knowledge didn't come from theory. It came from loss. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. In any survival situation, protect your heat before you chase comfort. Insulate before you improvise luxury. The soldiers who survived learned that lesson the hard way, and they left it behind for us. If stories like this matter to you, stay connected with Legacy of Survival. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone who values real history and practical knowledge. Every forgotten lesson we recover brings us one step closer to understanding how people endured when failure was not an option.